of this round, honestly, as I kept looking for, ways that you were perhaps, or places where you were perhaps ahead in this round, I kept on not being able to get past the arguments that are at the top of the 2NR, that in addition to this being a critique of democracy assistance and the topic, it's also a methodological critique of the way that knowledge gets produced, that the role of the ballot is the best method to confront oppression, that the judge is an educator concerned primarily with accessibility, and that their framework provides the standards by which I can judge accessibility and how good each team is at confronting oppression. I don't think a lot of what you do does not meet their framework. It could, but I don't think you get there. You make the argument that your social location is, as a policy debater, you're talking about the Middle East and so on. This is a fine argument, except that they're not saying that your speech is this disembodied speech act with no roots in any community. I think, obviously at some level, every speech act is going to be embodied in lots of different ways. It's always going to be kind of situated. Their link isn't that your speech act comes from nowhere, it's that it's in the 1AC presented that way. That whatever community you are representing, if you are an organic intellectual, the way that you are organic is invisible in the 1AC. They're making arguments throughout the round that this invisibility is strategic, that it's based on an assumption that debate space is neutral. And that these are all kind of methodological questions of how knowledge gets produced in the debate round that kind of work. They call it framework, and it's kind of applicable because it sort of acts as a gateway, or as a gatekeeper into what arguments count in the round. So what I looked for from your evidence is to see if any of these cards that you're reading on the permutation or on the 2AC and the alternative no-solve debate go far enough as to be making really definitive claims about why I should not be an educator, I should instead be a policymaker, why policymaking is preferable to this framework of attempting to confront oppression, and so on. And I don't think your cards get there. The Giroux evidence makes arguments about why we need to combine our critiques with kind of social practices that prepare social space and pedagogical space for change. I think they do that as much as you, and certainly the Giroux card doesn't go far enough as to say we should be policymakers. There's the Walt, I guess, I already forgot what the site was, which is a fine piece of evidence talking about why, in the context of Middle East discussion and as academics talking about the Middle East, we should, and about the Arab Spring, we need to be policymakers perhaps because we don't want the right to fill in. And that, I think, there is an answer to the critique at the level of, is the plan good? But it is not an answer to the critique at the level of, is your methodology and is your knowledge production good? Because at that level, it's not really a question of the Middle East. It's a question of the debate community. Mostly what really hurts you in this round is the concession throughout that the judge is an educator concerned primarily with accessibility. At that point, it becomes just very difficult for you to be weighing impacts. And at the end, I kept looking for ways that I could even get to a place where I had to resolve the perm debate. And I don't think there's any way to get there based on your answers to this kind of gatekeeping argument.
So what kind of arguments then do you think you should be making?
All right, well, you need to be interacting with their framework. In the 2AR, you make, for the first time in the round, the argument that perhaps the AF is organic. That's the first time that the word organic from their framework gets deployed by you as a description of your affirmative. That's a point of interaction that needs to be earlier in the debate. I'm troubled by both sides completely ignoring, or at least in my opinion, completely ignoring the subpoint 4 of this, which is coalition coalition building, which I think there could be a real debate about who better accesses coalition. But you could use a lot of this evidence to make arguments about why you are a good form of coalition building. Your arguments about the alternative and how it applies in this world of a democracy assistance critique need to be redeployed and rearticulated as arguments about your framework within debate and why that is perhaps good for coalition building. Likewise, y'all need to be making, or I guess you don't need to be, but it seems like it would be benefit. I don't understand why this part of the framework doesn't get spun into links throughout the round, and the other ones do. So I think those are both places where you either need to be, one, accessing their framework and saying, we do this in a way that's convincing from the beginning, or two, saying, we agree that the role of the ballot is about the best method to confront oppression, but here is our framework for how knowledge production should work that confronts oppression, and then making arguments along those lines. Or three, making convincing arguments about why the role of the ballot should be something else.
You said that one of the second way to do that might be to make arguments about how to produce knowledge. But,
sure.
Do you think just the wall card is good enough on that question, or how we should produce knowledge about things?
The wall card is fine. But it's really pretty, or my interpretation of it as I read it is that it's about the Middle East and about making IR policy. And so in that sense, it's almost too specific and not epistemological enough.
So then there needs to be more theoretical, on a generic level, or?
Yeah, there's two critiques going on here, and I think you're doing a good job of answering the critique of democracy assistance and the critique of your plan. You are probably winning that your plan is worthwhile and good, but you are not winning your knowledge production and the way that you have articulated your plan in the round. They're winning links like it's disembodied, it's detached from your personal situation, that it appears to be invisible and to speak from nowhere. And these are all link arguments that are methodological, the answer to which is something like, so the wall card talks about why experts are good in the context of this Middle East policy, right? A broader epistemological defense of why in communication it's okay, not just about the Middle East because we need to be practical, but in communication it's okay and perhaps even necessary to have disembodied perspectives, why a personalized approach to debate, or maybe I'm not using the right terms to describe it, is not the best for politics, is not the best for communication, doesn't produce the best arguments, and so on.
Do you think we have those arguments in today's views from the standpoint of epistemology that cards, do those just need to be more explicitly, or
Well, I didn't read, those cards could say that, yes. Depending on how good those cards are, that could very likely be a large component of this strategy. But it's sort of like you need to do all of the things at once. You want to, at the same time, say, we need to focus on the state, we should be policymakers. As policymakers, here's how we should evaluate the round, and policymaking is good. And without any one of those components, the others kind of fall apart. And so it doesn't necessarily help you all that much to be, even if you win, that we should perhaps be focused on the state, and that we should be trying to make practical policy decisions if you're conceding something like, I'm not a policymaker, I'm an educator. And they're making arguments throughout the round that are like, look, even if that shit's true, that you're saying the judge is not in a position to act in a way that solves that. The judge is in a position, the judge space as they're defining it in the round, pretty much all that I can do with it at the end of the round is vote for them. That's the only thing that feels productive in the way that they're defining this judge space and what my priorities are supposed to be as a judge. And so that's the level of this that really needs to get interacted with, is this question of what is the judge supposed to do, what does my ballot mean? And in the world where you are letting me be an educator who's just concerned with confronting oppression, the way that you would need to spin these arguments to action, it becomes a very uphill battle for you, at the least.
Okay.
Anything else here?
Instead of all the
Yeah, or perhaps make arguments, when I was saying earlier that I would have really liked more discussion of this coalition argument, there's a lot of these arguments that you're making could be internal links into which epistemology is better at building coalitions. For instance, you could say Kulnich, and you could say that role-playing in debate helps us build a sense of community across different perspectives. And that is better at being, so what we're doing in debate, even though it appears as though it's not tied to our community, it is in fact, as through your Kulnich evidence, could become an argument about why debate is good as it's currently practiced, right? And if it starts being more like that, it starts being an argument for why the way you role-play in debate makes debate a more effective community in terms of how it argues and fights against oppression. That gets back into their role of the ballot in a way that you aren't getting into it right now.
So could we frame it in terms of advantages and DAs? The coalition could be an advantage to why our framework is good. It's all the standpoint for its coalition building as a PA to...
Yes, absolutely. Okay. And if you put it in those terms and go for their framework or the way that they deploy arguments in the round, although it's situated and it's historical and so on, is destructive to the community in a way, or maybe not destructive to the community, but prevents the community from being as politically effective as it otherwise would be in confronting oppression. That's kind of gets to this critical internal link of the critique, and would be a point on which, if you win that, then all of your generally offense, it helps the perm, it helps all of the alts, no-solve arguments. It kind of ties them all into a defense of your form of debate. And that's what's missing, is just the defense of your form of debate. That ultimately, you need to be defending these ideas about because it is sort of disembodied speech. I mean, and so it is a very much, I guess you're right when you say that the standpoint arguments need to be later in the round, because without these arguments, it's really hard to get to that level of accessing those impacts. You're basically granting them that they have the only internal link into accessibility, which is, they're saying again and again, the most important thing I should care about.